We're really excited to have Jonathan Collegio here. He's Senior Vice President over at the National Association of Automobile Dealers, and he's their head of public affairs. He also wrote this, and I'll have him explain it. But as soon as I saw this, he sent it over to me. I was like, we have to build a session around this because I think it's so impactful. And so thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here, and I'd like to turn it over to you now.
Awesome, great. Thank you. Awesome to be here today. Thanks, everybody. Special thanks to Nick and Doug Pinkham from PAC for having me present this paper to you. So before we begin and get into the meat of public affairs strategy or advocacy strategy formation, I just want to take a quick poll of the room. How many people in the room would consider themselves mid to senior level advocacy professionals or executives? Okay, so that's just about everybody in the room. All right, my second question is, how many of the people in this room have a master's degree in advocacy? What's your degree?
Graduate School of Political Management.
Okay, political management. All right, so we have one. All right, and the lesson here is that we are all deeply experienced professionals, but very few of us are academically trained in what we do. We gain our experience through street level advocacy experience, and there's no better example of where this is crystallized than if any of you have received a pitch from a public affairs or a lobbying firm, right? Do any of them ever talk about their academic credentials? Never. It's always about the last clever tactic that they did in a campaign for some industry, and they try to make it sound like it's going to fit right into your strategy that you're trying to build out, right? So we are practitioners, and we argue and we think in terms of our experience. Now, that doesn't mean that academically this doesn't, that we don't have frameworks that exist. So a few years ago, in 2018, I did a mini MBA program at Harvard Business School. I felt like I had this hole in business education, so I went. It's a great program. It's called a Program for Leadership Development. Life-changing, actually. And one of the things that I learned in this program, it's super intensive, 7 months, is we did a reading by a professor named Robert Dolan. He's one of the marketing professors at Harvard Business School, and he wrote a paper called A Framework for Marketing Strategy Formation. It's about a company, Pebble, that develops a watch and brings it to market, a digital watch. This is a precursor to the Apple Watch. And as I was reading this framework and this story about how Pebble brought its product to market, it dawned on me that, and this isn't rocket science, by the way, but I think it's clarifying. It dawned on me that while firms sell products and services to customers, as advocacy professionals and strategists, we sell issues to audiences with a goal of influencing them in one way or another. But almost everything that happens between the issue product and the customer audience is the same, if not very similar, between the business world and the advocacy world. And when you think in terms of what all of your tactics are actually accomplishing from a kind of an abstract framework, it adds a lot of clarity when you're mapping out what exactly your approach to an issue will be when you're doing it with a team or whether you're doing it by yourself. It's super, super clarifying. How many people have been in advocacy meetings that are really tactics meetings? Right? Everybody has. So you start, oh my God, we need to be on Twitter. Really? Do we need to be on Twitter? I don't like, what are we doing with Twitter? Like, who are we trying to reach with Twitter? What does Twitter actually do? Right? Everybody has been in that situation. You're in a strategy meeting before you know it, like everybody's just throwing tactics up against the wall and we just kind of like muddle our way through it. This paper that I wrote, I hope, will have the effect of helping folks think through strategy more clearly. So let's get started. This is the what I call the framework for advocacy strategy. I'm going to go through all of these different pieces. And what we start with is an issue. The issue in the context. The issue is whatever we're trying to push. It could be a media relations issue. We might be trying to burnish the reputation of an industry. We might be trying to push an appropriations bill over the finish line. We might be trying to block a regulation from being promulgated in a governor's office, right? The issue can be anything. And when you're starting, it could be public policy, it could be legislation, it could be regulation, it could be marketing positioning. But what's critical at the front end of developing your public policy or your position on your issue is you have to absolutely dominate the information space on your issue. So take, for example, if you have Procter & Gamble, the biggest companies in the world, and they're going to bring a new toothpaste to market. Who knows more about their product than Procter & Gamble? Nobody does. Who develops their product? The product developers, the toothpaste engineers. I don't even know if that's a title, right? But they have people who are making that product and know more about it than anyone else. Similarly, you have to be in a position to completely dominate the information in and around the issue that you are promoting. All right? That's absolutely critical. Sometimes you don't have the resources to do that. Suppose you're representing the motorcycle clubs and they're trying to change a Department of Transportation regulation. The motorcycle clubs may not have the expertise to do that, so they have to hire somebody to do it. But all of your issue management starts from the position of dominating information and knowing more about your issue than anyone else. Again, it's not rocket science, I hope it's clarifying. Next, you have to think about the context in which you are promoting your issue. All right? If you're familiar in political campaigns, I came up in political campaigns, we talk about the political environment, right? A candidate is the product that you're selling to a voter. Their positioning is going to be very, very different if it's a low unemployment environment or a hot employment environment, right? The context matters. Similarly, if you're pushing an issue, a change of administrations can have a dramatic impact, even if you're pushing the exact same issue with the exact same audience. I'll give an example. A number of years ago, we had we were pushing an issue. It was the days of the Obama administration. One of the things about the Obama administration, love him or hate him, I think that any reasonable person can agree that he had some regulators that were pretty aggressive, all right? They had some regulators in some of those agencies that were getting a little bit over their skis just in terms of what they were trying to accomplish within the law. And what that meant is that when we were going about promoting this issue, we actually got a lot of, and we were opposed to the administration on this, we actually got a lot of sympathy from moderate Democrats, and we actually got a pretty fair shake from the media generally. Not all of the media, but we often got a fair shake. The media would listen to us and they'd hear us out. So the issue kind of plodded on. There was a change of administrations in 2017, of course. And suddenly we had the exact same issue. We had the exact same congressional audience, had the exact same media audience, but the issue landed completely differently because it was no longer about an over-aggressive Obama administration official who was pushing this issue. It had to do with the Trump administration now. And suddenly all of the people that were giving us a fair shake were totally close to the issue. So you have to understand that context matters. Doing effective contextual analysis as you launch your issue is critical to advocacy strategy formation. All right, so you have your issue, you know what you're pushing, you have a dominant position in information, you know what the political context is, the environment. The next thing you have to do is you have to look at the competitive environment. So we'll go to opponents first. Now, in a business context, you wouldn't call them opponents, you call them competitors, right? So you have to have a very good sense of your competitors, who you're competing against, what their resources are, what they're bringing to the table, and it could be stuff that's very, very obvious, it might be stuff that's kind of subtle, right? So if you think about these, the battles between the banks and the credit unions that happens year after year, all right? The banks come in, they have a ton of resources, and they fight against the credit unions, and the credit unions maybe don't have as many resources, but they have a lot of grassroots. They have a lot of local people. Not only do they have a lot of local people that are their own resources, they also have a lot of consumer group allies. So when you're opposing the credit unions, you're also opposing a network of outside groups as well. All of the strengths and weaknesses of your opponents and your competitors, you need to be thinking about that in the front end of your strategy. Similarly, you need to be thinking about who's on your team. Who are your collaborators? Now, in a business context, this is usually your suppliers. If I'm General Motors, and I am going to be building the Cadillac Lyriq, I need to have rubber manufacturers, I need to have steel manufacturers, electric components. These are people that I'm going to be buying from. These are my collaborators. In the advocacy world, your collaborators could be companies that you pay to fix a deficiency that you might have. All right, so suppose that you have an issue that you know is going to be super, super high profile. Is your media relations team capable of going toe-to-toe with your opponents in the Wall Street Journal? That's a very important question. And if they're not, you may need help from a media relations firm. Are you trying to attract a group of members of Congress that you don't have normally good relationships with? You might have to hire a lobbying firm to collaborate with you, right? Is this going to be a digital play? Do you have the digital expertise to be able to run this campaign? You may need to bring in a digital campaign expert to come and do that for you. Similarly, and this is what's a little bit different between advocacy and the business world, but you also need to be thinking about who is on your team from an ideological standpoint, right? Can this not only be your industry or your movement or your association, but it's a network, a coalition of people that are all on the same page. One of the things that it's what I think is probably the most brilliant public affairs initiative of the last decade was Google, when they were promoting net neutrality. Anyone remember net neutrality? They took this issue that was basically an economic, monetary issue between the telecom companies and the data companies, and they turned it into a Democratic presidential campaign litmus test. I don't know how they did this. I'm sure it took a lot of money, but suddenly you could not say something critical about net neutrality without 17 left-wing blogs attacking you relentlessly for 6 months. You were public enemy number one, all right? So think about who are the collaborators on your side. It may not be natural. You may have to go out and actually build it up, which is what Google did, but it's super, super important to be thinking about who your collaborators are. And then finally, you need to be thinking about your resources that you bring to this issue internally, all right? It could be financial resources. Do you have money to promote this issue? Do you have the personnel and staff expertise? I brought up the idea of the motorcycle club, right? Like, do you have the expertise to be able to truly go after this issue? Do you have time to do it? This is our most valuable asset. We often don't ask that question. Do we actually have the time required to pass this piece of legislation or to get these stories in the Wall Street Journal to shape public opinion? Is there a reasonable amount of time attached to your goal? Think about that. And then the other thing you have to, and this is very gritty, but you have to think about your own reputation. Do you have the reputation to be able to push this issue? Right? If you are the natural gas or the coal industry in California and you're fighting a regulation from CARB, the Air Resources Board in California, are you the best positioned entity to be pushing this issue? Probably not in the case of coal, right? So you need to think about how are you going to position this? Are you going to be able to use some of your collaborators to push this issue on your behalf? All right, so all of that goes into your competitive analysis. So we have the issue, we have the context, we know who our collaborators are, we know who our opponents are, we have a pretty good sense of all this, we know what our resources are. What's the next step? Well, if you're Procter & Gamble and you're going to be launching this new type of toothpaste, you need a message for it. Right, so that's the next step of advocacy strategy formation, is your messaging. So you have to develop a core message either through intuition, or if it's a really high profile issue, you might need to hire a messaging research firm. Now, is anyone familiar with the R Street Institute? R Street? Okay, so it's headed by this brilliant guy, Eli Lara, and he likes to talk about issues. He's a social scientist, so he has a 2x2 matrix, all right? That's how he thinks. And on one axis of this 2x2 matrix is an issue's complexity, and on the other axis is an issue's salience, or how high profile it is. All right, this is extremely helpful when thinking through your messaging and what you're going to need, right? So if you take an example of a high complexity, high profile, high salient issue would be healthcare, the Affordable Care Act. Everybody had an opinion on it. 12 people read the bill, right? Like, so it's super complex, super salient, right? In front of everybody. This is a case where you need to have messaging research, right? A lot of money's on the line. It's going to be in the news a lot. That's a hint to you that maybe you don't want to use your own intuitive messaging, but you might want to go out and hire a pollster to be able to do that for you. You could have an issue that's highly complex and low salience. Agricultural export subsidies. No one wants to know about this issue, right? But it's real, and there's a lot of money on the line. However, it's probably not something that's going to be fought out in the the front page of Politico, right? An issue that's high profile and there's high salient and low complexity: gun control, abortion, same-sex marriage. Those are issues that are not terribly complex, but again, super out in front in the media. And then you could have low complexity, low salience issues. Try to come up with one, like naming a post office. No one really cares, kind of goes. How about an appropriation, right? An appropriation kind of goes under the radar. The issue is fairly simple, appropriating this dollar amount to this thing. Not a lot of people are gonna know about it, just kind of happens, all right? But knowing where your issue falls on that 2x2 matrix it's gonna be very, very directional in terms of how you prepare your message, all right? Is there a lot of money on the line? You may want to hire a pollster. Is this an issue that you've gone through over and over and over again, and you have a very good sense of how your audience is going to receive it? If this is an issue that your lobbyists have been working for the last 7 years, you probably don't need a polling firm. But if you do, the way that they go about doing this is through focus groups, where you send your message out and you see how it's received by a random group of people or a targeted group of people that kind of match your audience. And then you kind of take what you learned from the focus group and you put it into a survey where the social science statistics can actually figure out scientifically how your message can be designed to best land with your audience. All right, so think through how you do your messaging. Another thing that's incredibly important to think about when messaging, there's a quote by Ken Melman, who ran President Bush's re-election campaign in 2004. He said voters were his audience that he was trying to move. He said voters don't care about issues, they care about values. So when you're thinking about your message, it's like, I'm for tax reform. Oh, that's great. I don't even know what that means. Like, what is tax reform? But if I say I'm for tax reform because we need to have a fair and fair tax system, if I'm arguing on the value of fairness, that issue is going to resonate more. So think through not just arguing your data points, but attaching a value to your data points. A couple years ago, I work in the automotive industry, and a few years ago, I had the pleasure of interviewing Tom Dahl, who is the head of Subaru North America. Now, when he took over the company in 2006, they were like the 10th or 12th performing automaker. They'd just been kind of plodding along. They didn't have a lot of money to throw into marketing. And they went and they researched Subaru buyers. And they tried to figure out, what is it that people love about Subaru? And one of the things that they found in the research, it wasn't really through the questions that they asked, it was more through the verbatims, what people kind of offered up. They love their Subaru. How many people, like, anyone have a Subaru and they love their Subaru? You feel safe in it. They have the all-wheel drive all the time. They have the eyesight feature, so you're always protected, right? People who own Subarus love Subarus, and what they did is they took their advertising messaging from talking about the vehicle's features, 28 miles a gallon, and all-wheel drive, and this and that, and they pivoted to talking about love. It's what makes a Subaru. They made it very emotive, they made it value-driven, and that was kind of the hockey stick moment with Subaru. From that point, 2006 until 2019 or so, they were the fastest growing year-over-year automaker in sales in the United States. Super impressive, but that's because they took their message and they applied a value to it. So think about that as you're creating your message. Where am I clicking? All right. So you have a message, and now you have to get your message to your audience. Now your audience could be journalists, legislators, regulators, car dealers, your members, if you have members. It could be the general public. You have to think about who they are. Can you segment them? Are you trying to get Republicans on Capitol Hill? Are you trying to get free market Republicans on Capitol Hill? Are you trying to get Northeastern free market Republicans on Capitol Hill? I don't even know it exists, right? But like, think about the audience segmentation and kind of drill down on how you're going to be getting to your audience. But another thing that's really important is, how do you get your message to your audience? What vehicle carries your message? It's content. So your messaging goes into all kinds of content. It could be short form, it could be long form, written, spoken, research, it could be research paper, it could be graphic design, it could be an image. Apple advertises through images, through imagery and artwork, right? That's actually a type of message. Video. I don't even know that you can run a public affairs campaign these days without a good and prominent position of video. But what's even more important than your content is thinking about not only who your audience is, but where your audience is in the receptivity of your issue, right? Now, in the business world, they would talk about a customer journey. Procter & Gamble launches a toothpaste. Nobody knows about the toothpaste yet, right? So they have to run ads about the toothpaste. Brand awareness, right? Broad one-to-many communications on TV or through the internet, right? Whitening and all that stuff, right? You have to think about where, because we have in the advocacy world, we have the same issue. We have an audience journey. If you're launching a piece of legislation or you're promoting a new issue through the media, where is your audience in the journey? They might be hearing about it for the first time and considering it. They might be evaluating it after they've heard some things about it. They might change their mind. They get a little closer and they make a decision as they're going to support or oppose the issue. Then they reflect on their decision, and then they might, this is like one of the best things that could ever happen, you have people that actually go out and market for you. They tell others and they become champions and they advocate on your behalf. When you're creating content, it is critically important to be thinking about how that content is going to land not only to the audience, but where they are in the audience journey. You could have an awesome 45-page research paper that absolutely logically kills your opponent. Nobody's going to read it. You have to make them aware first, and that might require a billboard campaign someplace, right? Something super, super simple, right? You could have an explainer video to get people when they're evaluating something. The research paper could be really, really important if they're trying to get somebody to change their mind, right? My advice here would be to spend both time and financial resources lavishly considering your content strategy and how it's going to land within your audience journey. I think that this is one of the most important things we do, and I don't think that we spend enough time thinking about this. Come up with a list of all the different types of content that you can create. Videos, blog posts, explainer videos, speeches, any kind of content. And think about where it's going to land with your audience and how you can actually complete the audience journal with your messaging. So you have the content, you know where the audience is in their journey, how do you get it to those audiences' eyeballs in order to influence them? That's the art of distribution, right? So when you think of distribution, it's paid or earned, it could be media relations, landing a story in the Wall Street Journal, it could be amplifying the story, you get the story in the Wall Street Journal and then you promote it with Google Ads, promotions, amplification. Digital, the website is a platform for carrying and distributing content, social ads, emails, super powerful. Speeches, powerful way to communicate, an issue. Events, a lot of energy at events through third parties. A third party can distribute the message for you, an ally, one of your collaborators, and also lobbying. So I want to talk about that a little bit. When a business thinks about distributing a message for a product or a service, you do it through a couple different ways. There's one-to-many advertising or one-to-one advertising marketing, right? So you start with one message, you broadcast it out to a lot of people, or maybe it's kind of one-to-one and you're dealing with one, with a person. Another piece of this that gets a little bit complex is if there's dialogue between the person who is issuing the message and the recipient of the message, right? So broadcast TV ad goes out to lots of people, there's no response, you have no idea how it really lands, right? Social media promotion on Facebook, where you invite people to comment, you can actually kind of have a dialogue. People like to have their voices heard, right? Robocall would be something like a one-to-one, but there's no opportunity for response. So there are all these different ways that you can distribute a message. Lobbying is the most interesting, and this is one of the things where one of the light bulbs came off. If you're selling, suppose that you're a company, you're a software company, and you're trying to get customers to buy your enterprise software. And you send your salesperson to the office of your potential client. And they say, wow, Jonathan, it's a great product, I love it, it's going to simplify our business processes and save money, but there's really this big problem because your software doesn't do this properly. Then the salesperson, what do? They go back to their product development people, their product engineers, their software engineers, and say, hey, I got a really, really great customer. All we need to do is tweak this section and we can get a sale. Say, oh, okay, well, let's do it. So they go and they tweak the product and you bring it back and you get a sale, right? Isn't that the same as lobbying, really, at its core? What is lobbying except for one-to-one communication with a dialogue whereby the salesperson can go back and tweak whatever they're selling, right? Go to the congressman, there's a lobbying meeting, the congressman says, yeah, this is really, really great. Constituents are not going to like, section 3, subsection D or something like that. Can you do something about that? So the lobbyist goes back to Ledge Council or whoever, and they go back and they tweak it if they think it's going to work, if they think they can still get more customers that way, and they bring it back and they sell the issue to the audience, right? Lobbying, at its core, when you abstract everything out of it, is the sales function of the advocacy campaign. And this is tricky because 25 years ago, when I first came to Washington, D.C. in the late 90s, if you think about it like a Venn diagram, advocacy and lobbying they almost completely overlapped, right? If you needed something done in Washington, D.C., you hire a lobbyist and they would open doors and figure out how to get it passed. And then you started having this thing where the big companies like AT&T and some of the drug companies, they started running ads that would pressure members of Congress within the context of a lobbying campaign. And then you started having third-party pay-to-play groups in the early 2000s who would start weighing in and putting additional pressure on your sales, right? You know that 15 years ago, we didn't even have digital advertising? Not meaningfully in an advocacy context. It wasn't really until 2011, 2012 that it was done in a meaningful way. There had been experiments earlier, but it wasn't really sophisticated until then. That was only 10 years ago, right? And now, the Venn diagram is a little bit split. Lobbying is a part of advocacy, but it's not the whole entire thing. It might be the most important part, it usually is the most important part, but it is part, not whole. And you have to think about that holistically, right? There are also different types of lobbying that can be very, very powerful and more effective than others. Anyone who has a grassroots network that can go in and use their local people to lobby, almost always more effective. That's like one of the reasons why the credit unions fight the banks really, really well, and they shouldn't. That doesn't really have an analog in business, by the way. I don't know of a situation where a local salesperson is going to make the sale better than that, the polished national salesperson. Grass tops lobbying is another form of sales where you get somebody that knows the customer, that has a reputation, and you get them to sell it on your behalf, right? But I think it's super helpful to think about lobbying as it actually is, which is the sales force of the advocacy campaign. All right. So from there, you get it to your audience. And your audience could be the journalist, could be the legislator, the regulator, the staff, or the public. And that brings together the framework for advocacy strategy. This is not rocket science, all right? I don't claim that this is like something that's super groundbreaking. I can tell you that I've been in Washington, D.C. a long time, and I haven't seen it written like this, so I hope that it is clarifying on the front end of your strategy discussions. This way you don't get caught up in these meetings that are tortured 3-hour affairs where people are throwing tactics up against the wall without really thinking through what the tactic does, right? Oh, we need Twitter. Really? Who is Twitter reaching in the audience journey? Do we need Twitter at all? Maybe we do, I don't know. But think about it more abstractly. Think about what Twitter accomplishes within this framework, and you're gonna have a much more effective strategy. And what it also does, as you're approaching it through this framework, you also have to do it agnostically. Right? You could have a 26-year-old digital guru pro who wants to spend the entire budget on digital ads. And you say, well, gosh, I know that a lot of this audience might listen to talk radio, and like, oh, nobody listens to talk radio because he doesn't listen to talk radio, right? Ignoring the fact that 18 million people listen to NPR and another 20 million people listen to right-wing talk radio, right? So you have to think about these different distribution channels agnostically as a company would, right? Your lobbyist might insist that this is a shoe leather lobbying campaign, but it might be bigger than that. Your media relations team might think that this is something that you have to go out and hammer out in the press, or they might say, oh, this is something that we don't want to hammer out in the press. We want to stand back a little bit, right? This is a low salience issue. Let's take advantage of the fact that it's low salience. But it's the job of the advocacy strategist to think through agnostically the best way to put together all of these tools from the advocacy toolshed to think about the most effective way to get your issue over the finish line given the resources that you have. Again, it's not rocket science. I have a paper out in front of you, so feel free to take it. I'm going to post it on my LinkedIn profile later today. If you have feedback on it, I would love to hear it. So look for me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Collegio. I'm on there. I'm going to post it. Would love to get any feedback that you have. If you want me to talk at one of your meetings or something like that, I'm happy to do it too. Just reach out to me through LinkedIn. Super appreciate Public Affairs Council for having me today. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.